Welcome to Cat Sheet Gaming. This is Cat Sheet 1383. This is part 2 of my Halo Infinite review. It was in one part, or actually still is, but a friend wanted me to split it up, so I did. When Master Chief arrives at the other end of the portal, you wind up in another part of the ring. And at this point, the game is actually starting to, or I should say, it's repeating itself again. We've seen this hallway multiple times throughout the game every time we go into the ring. I mean, the first time we saw it, it was destroyed, and then we saw it intact later, and here it is again. It's even the same layout. I get it, it's a common theme for game developers to reuse assets, but in this case, they didn't really do much except for change up the enemy types in the hallway, passageway, corridor, whatever it is. Like I said earlier, it's starting to feel like a Halo game. Particularly the first Halo. The pair come across a terminal and Cortana accesses it. She says they're below a big banished facility and there's a message for the chief. It's Esram showing that he has Echo 216 and that he's torturing him, and he's more or less bait for the obvious trap. After proceeding through the ring, you eventually come to a window and Cortana tells you to stop. She says she recognizes a structure off in the distance, not by sight but by signal, and that it's the building that she locked down Cortana in, which explains part of the story later on. As you proceed even further into the facility after this, you start hearing whispers of Cortana, and you come across a console in which it shows a facility and the AI that controls it, Leonidas, who then destroys the facility, which is the Spartan training facility. And Cortana is clearly shocked by her actions. Eventually, the Master Chief comes across the lift he has to activate, and after activating it, you get a cutscene, or sort of a cutscene, in which Cortana is talking to Lord Hood, demanding his surrender, and that of the UNSC's. She then attacks Sydney, the headquarters of the UNSC on Earth, destroying it. Cortana shows her surprise at her actions yet again. There's one thing I wanted to cover before I moved on, and that's when Master Chief retrieves the power cells from the two rooms, because you have to fight not one, but two brute chieftains in each room. These chieftains were far more difficult than any of the named bosses in the game, especially when you're doing a lasso run. It just felt like nothing was working on them. I launched rocket after rocket, and it took forever to kill them. It might have gone better with a sniper rifle, but there's a reason why I took the rocket launcher, and that's because the physics of the rocket launcher with all the skulls activated has a tendency to send them flying and makes it a lot easier to kill certain enemies. In this case, it didn't seem to work at all. On top of that, the arenas that they created for these rooms are just poorly done. Yet again, there's no cover whatsoever, and they have a tendency to be bullet sponges, or in this case, rocket sponges. So after the cutscene with Lord Hood, you proceed through the ring even further, in which you come across another point in which you install more power cells. It seems like they kind of ran out of ideas and just started to repeat or reuse ideas at this point. Like I said before, it's common for that to happen, but to the degree that it's happening in this game, it just doesn't feel like they thought this part out. I know they wanted to convey a part of the story, but you could still do that without making you go and get more power cells. Anyways, another cutscene plays after you get all the power cells, and it shows what Cortana did, which I guess is the most egregious thing she did. She's talking to Atriox, trying to get him to surrender, and when he refuses, she destroys a whole entire planet, as in the brute homeworld. This clearly enrages Atriox. And during this cutscene, Cortana realizes something that everyone knew from the very start when Echo 216 said she looked just like Cortana, and that she's a copy of Cortana. It feels kind of disappointing that they thought this would be some huge revelation.
This is part of me. I don't know why. I don't know how, but it is me. It was the last part I remember being deleted. Let me just... Hi.
What the? Cortana. But she...
when it was clearly obvious from the very start what she was. Especially if you've read any of the material from the Halo series or canon, you knew that they could make copies. Upon this realization, Cortana sort of gets why Master Chief has had trust issues with her. That the fear that she might become another Cortana, just like Cortana, and try and subjugate and destroy everybody and everything. She then asks Chief to delete her, but he refuses and takes her with him, and they go off to save Echo 216 together. When Master Chief reaches the surface of the ring, there's clearly a road that leads all the way to a building way off in the distance, called the House of Reckoning. And as a player, you have to fight through several waves of enemies to get to it. This part of the game feels more like an homage to the first Halo. They even play some of the music from the first game, which I'm pretty sure is a version of the Truth and Reconciliation song, or at least parts of it. This part of the game is fun, and in general, one of the few times you actually have a use for a vehicle due to the number of enemies and other vehicles to destroy, particularly because you get to use the Scorpion tank. There are wraiths, but they're still not as good as the Scorpion due to how they fire and not being able to see unless you fire and then quickly point the camera down and then make adjustments accordingly. On top of that, there's an achievement to get the tank all the way to the House of the Banished, and it's called Sheila, which is a reference to a red versus blue character. When Master Chief enters the House of Reckoning, they have set up an arena based around UNSC's sort of weaponry and structures. And it's the Banished's explanation of how they were so able to soundly defeat the UNSC when they showed up to the ring. The thing is, they even mentioned that this is where they bring the prisoners after they torture them from the tower. So in order to train for their presence, they would have to get UNSC forces before they could capture the ones off of Infinity, which is the ones they've been torturing. So this whole entire part doesn't make sense unless it's supposed to be sort of a retroactive explanation of what happened to the Spirit of Fire crew. There's no hint or even mention of the Spirit of Fire crew, so I'm not entirely sure. So it seems kind of pointless to take prisoners from a group of people you've already soundly beaten and then use them to train to beat more of them. I guess it was supposed to be in preparation for fighting Spartans and the Master Chief. I'm not sure. They don't do a good job explaining this part at all. But I will give them prompts. The arena in this part of the game is probably some of the best throughout the whole entire game so far, with plenty of cover and weapons and all that other fun stuff when it comes to fighting. After going through two of these arenas and fighting another pair of red hunters, you come across the Blade Master. This fight is more or less functionally the same as the tower boss. Aside from not having a firearm of any kind, the fight is functionally the same. Yes, he's more deadly because he's supposed to be since he has the intensified energy blades, but the fight is pretty much the same. On the lasso run that I did, he was somewhat difficult, and oddly enough, I had a harder time with him the first time I fought him when I had all the armor abilities versus the second time when I used an exploit to skip to the House of Reckoning, bypassing most of the game and missing out on several armor abilities. So after defeating him, you go and you find Echo 216 being tortured, and as you approach him, there's a cutscene where Escharum approaches. Now this next part of the game really irritates me because it's similar setups that were even in the first Halo and they didn't learn from it at all. And that's when you finish the cutscene, you're face to face with Escharum and he's holding a cannon that can fire really fast and it hits like a brick. No cover, nothing. Unless you knew it was going to happen, you're going to get hit in the face. And even if you did know it was going to happen and reacted to it, based on how accurate the AI is, you're still going to get a hit. And when I did my lasso run, I almost died because he shot me that fast. So this is where my biggest problem comes in, because they had not one, but two scenarios in the very first Halo, in which the cutscene sets up a fight that's going to occur when it ends. So as part of the cutscene, they show Master Chief taking cover behind something, and when the cutscene ends and the battle begins, you're behind cover. That way you aren't utterly destroyed by whatever's attacking you right off the bat. They didn't do that here. I don't know why, but they didn't do it, and it's just really bad game design to have not set that up. So the fight with Escharum isn't exactly new. Yes, the arena is arguably better, especially with all the weapons they give you, which you'll more than likely need them depending on what difficulty level and skulls you have activated. It unfortunately feels way too much like the fight with Brutus, the same chieftain that you fought in the laser control room. It also has the same feeling as the brute chieftains that walk around with the autocannons as well. It's like they just combined the two and thought that would make for a good boss fight. They did try and mix it up a little bit by having a scenario in which a shield popped up, and if you did damage to it, it would cause harm to Echo 216, resulting in a scenario where you have to disable the shield by shooting more of the same yellow panels as you did throughout the whole entire game. After beating Escharum, though, you have a cutscene when you're talking to 216, and he comes over and Master Chief sort of comforts him in a way with the explanation that he's a soldier and he's doing what he was supposed to do as a soldier. After this, Master Chief is dropped off by Echo 216 on another part of the ring close to the auditorium. I know I keep saying this, but you fight through enemies, and it's not the problem I have with, yes, there's going to be repetition in any game, and fighting them in a first-person shooter is going to be part of that. That's not the problem I have. No one wants to hear a one-to-one commentary of me going through the whole entire game with every encounter. I do stop and try and cover encounters that I think are of note. As you go towards the auditorium, you see more echoes of Cortana appearing every now and then, saying things that she said before. Which leads me to the most infuriating part of the game that I fought in. So there's another encounter with hunters, and I've already said my piece on how poorly designed they are in this game. But this time, for whatever reason, they seem far tougher than their brethren have been throughout the whole entire game. In combination with the poorly designed arena. I mean, in this room, there's a glass wall and 4 pillars. There are some containers off to the side that can provide cover, but there's one little nook and cranny I'll show you. But otherwise, that's it for cover. And even then, they have ammo containers around them, which potentially will kill you, so you can set those off to negate that potential danger to the chief. But it's still a poorly thought out arena. And I suspect that these hunters have been souped up to be far stronger than their brethren. I had footage of it, of me launching rocket after rocket after rocket, trying to kill them, and they would not die. They did add weaknesses to the joints in which you can shoot them there, but they move around so much and the shield protects them most of the time. And the back panel still gets blown off and exposes this orange squishy area. But they can turn on a dime, so you can't even attack that even if you wanted to. So I'll just briefly show you on the screen the little itty bitty hiding place that I had to use on one of my playthroughs, the one where I tried to negate a good chunk of the game, which the only thing I had was a rocket. And I found a tiny little space that allowed me to attack the hunters through, which didn't completely negate the damage that they could do to me, because they could still kill you in like 1 to 2 hits. And as I keep saying, they're really good shots. I mean, they can thread their shots right through this tiny little gap that I'm going to show you. So be careful of that if you try to use this as a means to kill them, which you can, it just takes a while. I eventually killed them on my legitimate lasso run by getting super frustrated and just going all out with the brute hammer that I got from Escharum. After this grueling fight with the 2 hunters, you eventually make it to the main room of the auditorium, and you have a rematch with the Harbinger of Truth. This boss fight is really easy in comparison to the other ones. It's arguably that the ads or the banished forces she brings in are far more difficult than she actually is, including the brute chieftain that comes in the last wave. And if you have the bandana skull and Escherum's hammer, it is even easier, especially on a lasso run. So the Arbiter of Truth teleports around and you have to try and land a hit in. When you do down her shields, she collapses to the ground and you can land several hits on her. She does this 3 times before she's defeated. And the point of this is to disrupt the signals she's sending out searching for something. Unfortunately, you sort of more or less did not stop her, and the signal gets out, setting up for sequels that there's a bigger threat coming, bigger than even the Flood. And the cutscene continues with Cortana showing up, or I should say an echo of Cortana, showing what happened. Atriox shows up in the room with Cortana as the Master Chief shows up. Or it's after, I'm not entirely sure, because they show the UNSC Infinity coming out of slip space. And she thinks Master Chief is showing up, but it's Atriox. At this point, I sort of wondered why didn't she, leave, because she's on a network. But then I remember the line from before in which Chipper Cortana said she locked her down, so she's stuck here. And that's how Atriox was able to confront her. On top of that, she realizes how they managed to do this, and that's with a copy of herself. She then asks Atriox if he would do anything different, knowing how he was going to die. He gives his answer, and she does what she needs to do in order to make amends for what she's done, and she blows up the ring along with herself. The auditorium starts to fall apart, and a portal appears, allowing Master Chief to go through and escape. He exits the other side of the portal 3 days later, in which Echo 216 comes and picks him up. Chipper Cortana then asks what his name is, because they've always been calling him Echo 216, and his name is Fernando Esparza. He asks what they should call Chipper Cortana. They don't answer, but I'm pretty sure they're going to choose Cortana. And the credits roll. So, was Halo Infinite better than Halo 4 and 5? Yes. In terms of its gameplay, for the most part, yes. In terms of its story, yes. Is it as good as Halo 2, 3, or even the original Halo? No, not really, but those are some high bars to pass. In some cases, technically, yes, it's far better than even the first Halo. But I found myself playing the game over and over again just to capture more footage of parts that I lost and wanted to re-record, and found myself bored and sort of just dreading going through the game over again. Now, this is probably nostalgia speaking, but I didn't have that same issue with the original Halo or even Halo 3. Maybe a little bit with 2 due to the boss fights and the story, but I found myself just tired of this game, and I probably won't return to it unless they add some more to it. Maybe when they come out with co-op, if that ever comes out, I'll play it again with my little brother or a friend. And I honestly don't care about the multiplayer aspect of the game, so I'm not even going to touch it for the purposes of this review. I did get some of the achievements, but I just didn't care for the multiplayer enough to try and get all of them. There are some aspects to the story that are glaringly wrong. A big problem with it is that 6-month gap that they had after Master Chief was beaten by Atriox. I'm not sure why they chose that amount of time. It sort of brings up how did Master Chief survive even in his armor for that long. Same for Echo 216. I almost thought that the beginning cutscene with him in the Pelican was just a glitch with it not rendering his hair and his beard. But then I realized it was to show a passage of time. They didn't need to do 6 months. I don't know why they did 6 months. You could have just done a couple of hours or even days, and it wouldn't have affected the story. Some of the most glaring plot holes are how did Chipper Cortana get down if Master Chief was defeated on the Infinity? And I don't want to engage in apologetics for the big huge glaring plot hole. There are negative aspects to the game, such as the brute chieftains and the hunters being way too tough, especially on a legendary with all the skulls on. When I sit there for 10 minutes shooting them with rockets and they don't die, there's something wrong with your game design. And definitely at the end, it does come a little bit repetitive in terms of its environment, reusing assets that they already used from the beginning of the game and in the middle as well. But as cynical as I am, I'll admit I had fun. I mean, eventually it did sort of drone on, and that's because I had to play it a lot in a short amount of time. But, like I said, I had fun with the game. I enjoyed the new armor abilities, particularly the grappling hook. The ability to grab the containers and toss them at banished forces. I just wish the vehicles were a little bit more effective. The Wasp and the Banshee couldn't even do damage to anything bigger than a ghost. And on a lasso run, the vehicles were just virtually useless. The game is definitely a good step in the right direction in terms of making Halo a much better and more popular series again. I actually look forward to what they're going to do with the sequel if it ever comes out. So Halo Infinite was able to salvage the Halo series. For me, this was going to be the last game if it wasn't even remotely entertaining. And considering how a lot of the shooters I used to play have just turned to trash, it's nice to see that effort was actually put into the game, as you can tell from the constant delays it went through. I'm just curious what they're going to turn the game into. Is it going to be sort of like a games of a service thing based around the multiplayer and the campaign of this game? Or are they going to do a direct sequel? Is the game worth buying? I felt like it is, but I want to wait and see until they add more to the game. Let's face it, it was not finished. There's a lack of menus to navigate to parts of the game you might want to replay again, which I don't know why they didn't have. No co-op and other things like that. But if you say you have Game Pass, yes, give the game a go. Try it and play it. If you like it enough, buy it. So if you made it this far into the video, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. If you made it this far into the video, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.